Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is This Way Up, brought to you by the Zionist Voice. I'm your host, Ted Goldstein. Today, we'll be talking about what's happening in Minnesota, and more broadly, what's happening all over the world. Ruth is dead, and we killed her. That much is clear. After watching everything that's been unfolding in the past couple of days in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and especially watching the response and the reaction to it on social media, it's very clear to me that what happened between this woman and the ICE officer does not matter at all. The truth of the matter, whether or not she drove her car at him, whether or not it was provoked, whether or not the tire slipped on the ice, all of those things, all of those factors, they're not going to matter within 24 hours when this podcast is made. The sides are drawn. People have chosen where they stand. People either side with the protester who was killed or with the ICE agent who killed her. Unfortunately, tragedies like this happen all the time. Tragedies where someone is killed in a situation that they did not need to die in. But that situation was created. It was a dangerous situation. The situation when you have police enforcement, law enforcement on one side, and angry protesters who are shouting and blocking traffic on the other is an objectively dangerous situation. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. Now, who's at fault here? We can argue till we're blue in the face talking about it. The real danger here is that this is escalatory, that the violence that we're seeing in the streets is getting worse. It was only a few months ago that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and there were two responses to his death, one of great mourning and one of great celebration. And what that says and what that shows is that we are an extremely divided nation and an extremely divided people. And I use we to talk about Americans in general because I don't want to give in to the he said, she said of politics as they are today, right? Well, they did it, so it's okay for us to do it. The whataboutism, whatever you want to call it, we're too polarized. We are all affected by political violence. When that violence is done against our political enemies, doesn't matter because that violence will be done against us at some point. It's only a matter of time when you live in a situation with so much political violence before it goes both ways. And for those of us who have been paying attention to the anti-Zionist movement and the anti-Zionist riots that were happening in 2023, 2024, 2025, we are all very aware of how dangerous political violence can be. But this is not about Jews. This is not about Zionism. This is not about Israel. So people actually care when someone is killed or when someone's life is affected. And I cannot make it clear enough that this is a tragedy. And when we go on and talk about the pragmatism or the sort of practical implications of what we need to think about going forward, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is a tragedy. But what is the tragedy exactly? Is the tragedy that a woman was shot by an ICE officer? Is the tragedy that there are ICE officers who are patrolling our streets in plain clothes and arresting immigrants? Is the tragedy that we can no longer speak to one another with respect and decency to talk about how it's one thing to have immigration into the country and it's one thing to have completely unfettered immigration? Is the tragedy that every time someone dies in an active police shooting or on the street, our first response is always to go to the internet and to vent our anger and look for whoever is agreeing with us? What's the real tragedy here? Real tragedy here, I believe, is that truth is dead, and that when truth dies, so do people. We've become so accustomed to our political fighting and our political disputes that we've lost sight of whether or not things are right or wrong to begin with. The simple truth in this situation is quite obvious. The simple truth is that if you have a situation where law enforcement officers are regularly taking people off of the street and arresting them and deporting them, and you have people who are going to those raids and who are protesting and who are obstructing those ICE officers, and you have the leaders of their political parties pushing this kind of violent rhetoric, when you have politicians who, after every major tragedy, say it's their fault, they started it, we need to fight back, we need to punch back. When you have that happening all the time, it's only a matter of time before someone dies. And this is not the first victim of political violence in the US, nor was Charlie Kirk the first victim of political violence, and nor will they be the last. We seem to be getting closer and closer to a truly unsafe and unstable political situation, one in which it's becoming more and more difficult for me to believe that the results of the 2028 election will be accepted. It seems quite obvious that whatever side loses, they're going to deny the results of the election. They're going to say it was stolen. They're going to say there was voter obstruction. They're going to say whatever. I have very little faith in the current political class in the United States. And that's very scary because our leaders are the ones that we are supposed to turn to in times like this, when tragedies do happen, when we need to know how to respond. And we need leaders who will tell us to turn the temperature down, to not relax, but to calm down, to look for what we have in common, to look for what our shared values are, to find a way to lower the temperature, to be more comfortable with one another, to have dialogue without violence. We haven't seen that. And the response to this shooting has been the most polarized, I think, of any of the shootings so far. And it's following a pattern, right? Each time there's a shooting, it gets progressively more and more polarized. And it seems quite obvious that we're going to get to a situation of real street violence at some point. Is that going to be in Minnesota this weekend? Is it going to be in Portland? Is it not going to be this time, but the next time or the time after that? Because if ICE doesn't change their policies, and there's no indication that they will, and the Democratic leadership continues to use violent rhetoric against it, then there's going to be more violence. It's not rocket science. If you promote violence, there's going to be violence. People are not that complicated. People are not really capable of constantly shouting things like punch a Nazi, ICE is all Nazis, kill an ICE agent. You can't continue to see and think and do these things and say these things and hear these things without them actually affecting you. It is unfortunate that this needs to be said, but it does need to be said. Violent rhetoric leads to violent actions. I'm going to say it again because it feels like no one is talking about this, but violent rhetoric leads to violent actions. We in the Jewish community know this all too well, and we've been talking about this for years, and unfortunately no one paid any attention to us. And we ended up with a situation where the violent anti-Zionist rhetoric that had been going on college campuses for decades blew up first on October 7th and then on October 8th. The violence of October 7th was exactly like the violent rhetoric that we were hearing from Hamas for 20 years. And the violence that we saw on the college campuses was exactly like the violent rhetoric that we were hearing from Students for Justice in Palestine and all of their lackeys for the same period of time. Violent rhetoric leads to violent actions. Period. If you want to live in a world with less violence, you need to change your rhetoric. You need to think about what are the things that I'm saying and how will someone who's listening to this be affected by it. I try very, very hard on this podcast not to promote violent rhetoric of any kind. There are plenty of things that I am angry about, and there are plenty of things that I could say we need to fight back against this tooth and nail with everything that we have, with all of our firepower. But I do my absolute best not to, because I know that that is only increasing the temperature. It's only increasing the tension. It's only adding to people's feeling of agitation. And we're all too agitated right now. We're all too scared and angry and bitter for all of these negative emotions that are coming all the time, every day. Every day that we are on social media and that we look at what's happening in the world, there's nothing but anger and frustration. There used to be, when you'd get the newspaper, there used to be a comic section in the newspaper. There used to be a sports section in the newspaper. There used to be an arts and culture section in the newspaper. There were things in the newspaper that were not inflammatory. Even headlines were not always bad news. Mostly they were bad news, but not always. But now we don't have any of those soft stories in our media. We don't get any of the human feel-good stories about a dog who saves the neighbor's cat and you get that cute picture, or the Dilbert comic that makes you giggle while you're drinking your coffee in the morning. We don't have that. All we have are heavy-duty stories. Anger, politics, frustration, economics, geopolitics, international relations, and it's all bad all the time. I'm not the first person, and I'm sure I won't be the last person to talk about, we live in such a polarized world where we're constantly torn between people who are fighting for our attention in the attention economy. Yes, that's true, and that's a cliche. But I want to talk about what's it going to take to change that? What do we have to do as individuals to break out of this polarization that is making us so agitated and angry all the time? What do we need to do to say that we are no longer going to participate in this violent rhetoric, right? We're not going to see a news story and react immediately. We're not going to do that. What's it going to take for us to develop that kind of moral patience? The ability to wait and think and feel before making a moral judgment. Before we can get to moral seriousness as a community and as a society, which is where I think we need to go. We need to go back to a place where we are all morally serious people and we treat issues that affect us and our sense of right and wrong with seriousness. But we can't get to moral seriousness until we have moral patience. And patience is hard. No one likes to be patient. Everyone wants immediate gratification. Is that what it's called? Instantaneous gratification. That's what it is. Did I say gratification? I don't think that's a word. Immediate gratification. We're all looking for immediate gratification. And unfortunately, morality is neither immediate nor gratifying. Morality is not something that makes you feel good. It's something that makes you feel full. It's a very big difference. More often than not, when you make the morally correct decision, when you are morally right, you are righteous, you feel bad. You are almost always denying yourself some kind of pleasure in order to act in a moral way. And that is the absolute antithesis of our current political rhetoric. Our current political rhetoric seeks instant gratification of our anger and our vitriol well before we have had any time to actually process and think and feel about whatever it is that we're looking at. We experience politics the same way that we experience video games or television. If you think about the past 25 years, from 2000 to the present, in 2000, the kinds of media that people consumed, most people theoretically still read books, although they didn't read them as often, but they did read books in 2000. They certainly went to movies and they certainly watched TV shows. TV show is about 22 minutes. A movie is an hour and a half if it's well edited. And these things they require patience for you to be pleased by them, for you to experience the pleasure of seeing a movie or seeing a TV show. You have to at least be willing to sit for 20 minutes to watch a TV show. How many of us have the patience to sit and watch a TV show without looking at our phone at the same time, or our laptop or our iPad? That we no longer have the 20 minutes of attention to watch a TV show. We no longer have the 90 minutes of attention required to watch a movie. We certainly don't have the 3 hours of attention required to watch a Shakespearean play. And these things are really important because our spiritual patience has been worn away slowly by our desire to seek this instant gratification. You can watch an Instagram Reels for an hour and never watch a video that's longer than 15 seconds, and you'll experience more pleasure than you could watching a fantastic film, right? Each reel gives you that dopamine bump, and the algorithm gives you exactly what you want, exactly what you like. You get that dopamine hit, and then you just move on. And that means that we've lost our sense of artistic patience. We don't have patience to look and watch and feel and experience art. We certainly have lost it when it comes to communication. We text each other. Most people could not sit in silence with another person for 10 seconds, let alone a minute. And we've lost so much patience that when political events happen, like what happened in Minnesota, we want to respond faster than the information will get to us. That we hear that a woman has been shot by an ICE officer, and immediately we make a judgment. Either A, the ICE officer was wrong, or B, the woman was wrong, depending on your political framework. And we make a judgment and we decide how we're going to feel about it before anything actually has come to light. And theoretically, right, this could be just a tragedy that's ascribed to the ICE on the ground. That there was a communication breakdown. The woman was trying to turn away. There was ICE on the ground. Her car went straight into the ICE officer and he shot her, and it's just a truly tragic accident. All of these things exist within the realm of possibility, and I am not a forensic expert, so I don't feel confident at all to say what happened. I'm looking at the situation and I say, here is a tragedy, almost completely avoidable tragedy. And it's a tragedy that anyone who had been watching our political show for the past couple of years could have predicted. This woman did not have to die, but someone did have to die if we were going to continue having this political show every time there's an ICE raid. And maybe we should have this political show. Maybe we feel very strongly that what ICE is doing is extremely unconstitutional and is un-American, and that we as Americans need to show that our sense of duty will not be threatened by a sense of fear. That could be the case. I don't know. I only know that talking this way that we have been talking is going to create more violence. And the solution is that we have to build moral patience. What moral patience is that moment between stimulus and judgment. It's the moment between when you see something happening and you decide how you feel about it. Because to be a truly morally serious person, you have to be in control of your moral judgments. You're the one who decides what is right and wrong, and you can change your mind about that. It's a beautiful thing about being a human being. You can make a moral judgment on Monday and change it on Tuesday, and go back to it again on Thursday, and realize on Friday that you were thinking about the whole thing wrong. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of human existence. But we cannot do any of that if we just make a decision based on instant emotional response. That when you see something happening, if you immediately click on and say, all right, this is what happened, I know exactly what it is, and it has to be exactly how I thought it was, you're going to turn yourself into a moral pygmy, to this tiny little spiritual person who has no capacity to think about things like an adult, no capacity to think about things in their complexity, and no capacity to think about things outside of what other people tell them. Because if you are a morally serious person, there are times that you and your tribe, your political party, your religious group, your friend group, there are times when you and your tribe are going to disagree. And you know that you're a morally serious person when you can disagree with your tribe without quitting them. When you can say, I don't think that you're right about this. That doesn't change our relationship, right? You thinking that this was an act of violence or this was not an act of violence is not going to change whether or not you and I are friends. That takes a tremendous amount of moral fortitude. That is the order of operations. Moral patience, moral seriousness, and moral fortitude. When you have developed the patience to wait before making a moral judgment, you've developed more moral patience than the vast majority of the people we're living with have. And that gives you a tremendous amount of strength, something that you can own and say, I feel confident in my ability to look at a situation, to have my feelings, and still to wait before I pass judgment. That alone is a tremendous gift that you give yourself. You give yourself that gift because you don't want to let the zeitgeist of what's happening in the world or to let peer pressure determine what you think is right in the world. That is the beginning of the development of your moral independence. When you can say, I don't need to jump on the bandwagon immediately. You can just wait. Once you have that patience and the ability to wait, then you can develop moral seriousness. The ability to seriously look at all issues, to anything that comes in front of you, and say, I am going to evaluate this with maturity, and I'm going to evaluate it with no political intention. No pragmatic or practical intention. Because the reality in life, and we don't really want to deal with this, but the reality is that morality has a cost. That to behave immorally and amorally is cheaper and more lucrative than being moral. You will make more money if you use cheaper products when you're building a house. You'll make a less safe house, but you'll make more money. And a morally serious person will look at that and say, no, I'd rather make less money and build a good house than build a bad house and make more money. And if we're honest, we've all been in situations in which we've seen this exact situation put before us. And we made the wrong decision. We made the easy decision. We made the cheap decision. We made the lucrative decision. We did whatever we wanted, whatever was in that situation. We made a choice for our practical benefit over our moral fortitude. And that's okay. That's part of being a morally serious person, is acknowledging that morality is hard. It's hard to go into the world and say, I want to do the right thing, even though I know basically no one else is, right? Look around. Where are the morally serious people? What's the morally serious person's response to what happened in Minnesota? Where are the politicians who are telling us, hey, this is a really complicated situation. Please, let's wait till we have the facts before we start rioting and beating up on other people on the internet. They're not there, okay? They should have been there. They should be there, but they are not. And so we don't have models of moral seriousness, so we have to create them for ourselves. We have to say, what are we not seeing right now that we want to be seeing? I want to see the governor of a state embroiled in partisan violence. I want to see him come out and say, people, we all have the same ends in mind. We all want to live well under the law. We all want to live peacefully. Let us mourn the death of one of our community without increasing violence. Let's come together in mourning and not in protest, in solidarity and not in anger. That's what I want to see. I'm not seeing it, so I need to figure out, how do I cultivate within myself the ability to do that myself? How do I become the kind of person who, I don't need to talk to anybody else. I don't need to be promoting morality in the world. I don't need to be, going on social media and telling everybody how to feel about things. How do I cultivate the confidence that I need to be secure in my own evaluation? As long as we're coming up with new terms, we might as well call that moral confidence. How do I do? I guess we have moral fortitude. Moral fortitude and moral confidence. In the comments, you guys can let me know which one you prefer, because we're going to be going with that one in the future. Moral seriousness, right, comes from the ability to say, these are complicated situations. Moral fortitude or moral confidence, again, I like them both. You guys got to let me know which one is better. Moral fortitude is then the ability to say, I've made a judgment. I've made a moral judgment about this situation. And no matter how many people tell me that I'm wrong, I'm not going to change that judgment. Because being told that my judgment is wrong doesn't mean anything. If someone proves to me that it's wrong, then I'll change my judgment. If you can prove that I am wrong, that the decision I made based on my own set of moral values was the wrong decision, and you show that to me, then I'm going to change my perspective, because you've made a moral argument to me. But if you try to use peer pressure or dog whistles or social media or whatever to put pressure on me to change my mind because I'm afraid of consequences, then you have not made a moral argument to me. Then you're just trying to convince me to change myself because it will be more convenient for me. You're trying to essentially force my hand in my moral judgment, and that's unacceptable. Of course, we see this happening all over the world. Again, it's most obvious with anti-Zionism, right? That every time an artist or an actress or whoever gets successful and reaches a certain level of success, they're then made to take the Zionist litmus test. Will you agree with what we all have to say about Zionism, even if you've maybe never heard of it, simply because it's going to make your career easier? Or are you going to stand your ground on what you believe to be right? That is what moral fortitude is. The ability to stand there and say, I don't care how many people are mad at me. I don't care. I don't care how many people think I'm wrong. I think I'm right. And I could be wrong. But until someone proves to me that I'm wrong, I'm going to hold my ground on this position. That is moral confidence. When you have moral patience and moral seriousness and moral fortitude, you become a morally independent person. You are your own judge of right and wrong. Wherever you go in the world, you can be confident that there is one person in that room who is going to be serious when it comes to right and wrong. You. You become the one. And that's a beautiful and powerful thing. Because morally unserious people cannot be morally independent. They are completely dependent upon the morality of the greater community, the morality of the majority, that they can't make their own moral decisions. They have to wait to be told how to feel about things. These are the morally dependent people, whose senses of right and wrong is determined by others. I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to be the kind of person who is essentially a dog, that you're a moral dog. That you might walk in front of the person, you might look like you're leading the way, but really there's a leash on your neck. And every time you come to a moral crossroads, you have to look back and see, what is society telling me to believe? It's a terrible way to live as a human being. What makes us a human being is our ability to think about things on our own. We don't need the pack to tell us how to live. We need to live with others. And that's where the complication comes from, right? It's difficult to live in a world with other people, especially when they disagree with you. If everybody agreed with me, we would all get along much better, and you would all be much smarter. right? Every time someone disagrees with me, they demonstrate that they're stupid. Just kidding. It's actually quite a beautiful thing when you feel yourself developing this moral confidence. It's much more similar to building a muscle than you might think. That you actually feel every time you work this muscle. You feel the tension when you go against the grain, when you develop your own understanding of right or wrong. And when you do that, you feel that it's a spiritual soreness. There's pressure from other people, there's anger, there's social media, there's all of this stuff. But when you stand your ground and you feel that spiritual soreness, that's how you know you're growing. That's how you know you're developing. That's how you know you're getting better. And that is what we need to cultivate if we want to live in a world with less political violence. Because we have to ask ourselves, is this the world we want to live in? Every week, it seems that we are becoming more and more violent. Do you like that? Is that how you want to live? Because that's not how we used to live. We didn't used to live with this much constant violence. It's a choice we made. And unfortunately, I think it's a choice that many of us made subconsciously because we were dependent upon other people for our morality. So we waited to hear, what are we going to do? How should I feel about this? Well, I need to wait until enough people on the internet say what I should think about this before I make my judgment. Is this the world we want to live in? Or do we want to live in a world with morally independent people? When you can walk into a room and be confident that if something happens, everyone in that room will make a decision about whether or not it's right or wrong. That's the world I want to live in. Because that's a serious world. That's one where we can talk about things and we can understand that there are complicated situations in life. Things are not always as they seem, and they're certainly not so cut and dry. But in that world, you can trust other people because you know that they are going to do something based on what they believe themselves. In this world, unfortunately, you can't really trust anybody else. You can't trust anyone who's morally dependent because what happens when you become a threat to their social standing? What happens when being friends with you or being loyal to you or having a relationship with you becomes socially disadvantageous? That's what happened for so many of us with our anti-Zionist friends or even our quiet friends after October 7th. That if we were loud and proud to be Jewish, other people were scared to talk to us because of the moral implications that it might bring for them. Sorry, not the moral implications, but the social implications. That being friends with someone who reads or writes or something called the Zionist Voice is a very, very dangerous thing to do for your social standing if you go to Berkeley or Columbia or Harvard. And so what happened, we all saw this happen, is that people slowly gave up their right to make their own decision about things because they didn't want to. They didn't want to be held accountable for their own sense of right and wrong. So they abdicated it. They gave it up to the collective, and they said, you tell me what is right and wrong, and I'll do whatever you tell me, just as long as I will never be excluded from the group. As long as I can be a part of the group, the group can determine right and wrong. And that is really the choice that is before us now, moving forward. Will we defer to the group, or will we choose right and wrong for ourselves? Whatever group you're in, if you're on the right, if you're on the left, the same is true. And you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be a morally dependent person who's inside of the group? Or do you want to be a morally independent person who can live on your own and who can determine right and wrong for yourself? I'm not going to pretend that the choice is easy or that it's obvious. There are costs associated with this. There are very heavy costs, as a matter of fact. And it's not entirely clear what the benefits are, other than the ability to go to sleep knowing that you are in control of your own moral values. And for me, that is more important than anything else. There's nothing more terrifying than looking in the mirror and not knowing what you're looking at. Because if you look in the mirror in the morning and you have to wait for the group to tell you what is right and what is wrong, you're not really there. You're just an empty vessel waiting to be told what to do. And so what we need to do is we need to cultivate moral independence. First with moral patience, and then moral seriousness, and then moral fortitude. With these three things, we can make ourselves into the kind of people who can determine right and wrong on our own. If you are a parent or a grandparent, these are the three things that you should be focusing on with your children and grandchildren. These three things are what will determine whether or not they are an individual or a part of a group. If you are scared about what's happening with young people in the United States, if you're scared about how people can be so blind to what you think is so obvious, remember these three things and ask yourself, am I talking about a person who has cultivated enough moral patience to wait before making a judgment about something? Am I talking to someone who approaches issues with enough seriousness to be willing to go against the group if it means being right? And am I talking to someone who has enough experience doing this that they have a sense of self-confidence and fortitude with their own morality? Is this a spiritually confident person? Those are the three things that you need to look for when you are thinking about people. Because there are a lot of people who fit into the group. There are a lot of people who look like they're morally independent people. They look like they're morally serious. They certainly talk a big game, but they've never had an independent thought in their life. And those people, I mean, why are you wasting your time talking to them? You could figure out everything you needed to know about them just by scrolling through social media. Don't waste your time. Talk to people who are independent. Talk to people who are unique. Talk to people who have their own sense of right and wrong and who aren't afraid to stand up for. Those are the kinds of people that you want to be spending your time with. Those are the kinds of people you want your kids to be spending their time with, right? These are the things that we should be focusing on now. Unfortunately, Minnesota is burning. It looks like it's going to continue to burn. It burned very recently. We all remember what happened after the George Floyd murder. And so, as we look at this situation and we feel the heat intensifying, ask yourself, what is it going to take for me to turn that heat down? What's the kind of world that I want to live in? We might not ever be able to live in that world. The reality of political violence is that it escalates very quickly. And we could easily be in a situation in 1 to 3 to 6 months where there's so much political violence around us that moral seriousness and moral fortitude are more or less irrelevant. That, when you've got Nazis on the right and communists on the left, and you're just a free market Jew in the middle, there's not a lot of time for moral seriousness. I hope that doesn't come to pass. I hope that things go differently, but I do know that no matter what, the ability to think about things for yourself is the most important thing to cultivate as an individual. If you don't do that, you will never know who you are. You will just be a member of a group. And there's no fun in that. There's no joy. There's nothing unique. All it is just basically being a sheep. Maybe a fish, more like a school of fish. And so as we leave and we look at what's happening in Minnesota this weekend and we sit with bated breath as we hope that the country does not once again devolve into brother on brother violence and tumult and turmoil, bear these things in mind and ask yourself as you are watching these things unfold, am I evaluating these things for myself, how I think they are, or am I just going along with whatever my group says? And that is how you will determine if you are or are not a morally independent person. And if you are not where you want to be with that, there's good news. You can grow. You can work at it. You can get better. All that it takes is patience, seriousness, and confidence. Patience, seriousness, and confidence will take you to where you want to get as a moral person. And those are the most important three traits that you can cultivate within yourself. And so, as we go into what appears to be a very, very tumultuous weekend, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. I want to wish you all a lot of peace. I want to close, as always, spread love, spread light. I'm Yisrael Chai. Thank you so much for joining us. This is This Way Up, brought to you by the Zionist Voice. I'm Ted Goldstein, signing off.